And at the time, it was depressing to be like, we're going to fill that whole room. And gee golly, I'm going to produce comedy. But I realized, you know what? We built it up from that in the beginning, and we can do it again.
You're listening to Comedy Ghost Town, where we investigate why Albuquerque, New Mexico has no designated stand-up comedy club. My name is Sarah Kennedy. The website comedyhints.com, which aims to encourage the community to learn from each other and help comedians get better faster, posted an article in 2015 entitled, "The Comedy Scenes of the Largest 50 Cities in America." The article goes city by city and describes the clubs in each metropolis, from Salt Lake City to New York. There are two cities on the list that stood out to me, Memphis, Tennessee, and New Orleans, Louisiana. These two are notable because, despite being two of the largest cities in the country, neither have a comedy club of their own. The author of the article chalks this up to a music scene in both towns, which allows for live events to thrive, but maybe also makes it hard for a comedy club to compete. When I interviewed New York/Denver/traveling man comic Brett Hiker, he also brought up New Orleans.
New Orleans has never made a comedy club work. And New Orleans is a very interesting town in that they've got a great comedy scene. And you would think a city like that could really support a comedy club, because you can also do a lot of ET comps. There's a big African-American population and whatnot. But every time they open a club there, it doesn't last long. But one of the interesting things about New Orleans is I've been on these bar shows where it comes time for the show to start and there's not really an audience. And usually that's the part where everyone just starts pacing and being like, oh gosh, should we cancel it? What should we do? Should we delay it and whatnot? And of course, everything starts a little late in New Orleans, but they get 15 minutes, half an hour after the show is supposed to start. And they're not even worried. That's just what time New Orleans people are on. And then they go, let's start the show. And they'll say that to start the show to a crowd of 0. They'll be like, start the show, but it's New Orleans. And all the buildings are very open. They all have windows that are open, and you can probably sit. You can have seats there where you sit on the sidewalk on a stool and whatnot. And people are always out in the street, drinking drinks. And if you start a show in New Orleans, people will just start filing in. They're like, oh, something's going on. And it works for almost every kind of art in New Orleans, whether it's poetry or music or whatnot. People are just like, oh, something. And also because it's an open container town, you can walk in, get a drink. If you don't like it, you don't even have to finish your drink. You can just walk right back out and go to the next place.
I mentioned that the article came out in 2015, and a lot has changed since then. First off, there's been a shakeup in demographics. When the 2020 census came out, New Orleans had dropped to just outside the top 50, to 51st. And while Memphis maintained its top 52, a new city was now present, Albuquerque, New Mexico, sitting pretty at 32. If the article was re-released today, would Albuquerque have been included? What would have been said about us? Would a swingin' music scene still be the diagnosis for towns without comedy clubs? Now, this isn't to say anything negative about our music scene. Shout out to the Red Light Cameras and the other incredible hardworking local musicians in town. However, Albuquerque is usually the Monday, Tuesday town that bigger acts only occasionally play on their way to bigger markets. So, I don't know if that's really what's stopping us. And honestly, I'd love to take a closer look at Memphis' situation and see if that's really what's stopping their scene from having a club too. So, stay tuned for my new podcast, Comedy Graceland. Just kidding, for now. One city that has been present in the top 50 cities for years and years is Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You may remember from the first episode that Milwaukee boasts one comedy space currently, the fantastic Laughing Tap. It's just called the Laughing Tap, but I'm adding that it is fantastic, and that's peer-reviewed by peers. Fellow comedians have been to the Laughing Tap and performed, and they love it. Interestingly enough, the Laughing Tap opened after that comedyhints.com article came out, and the two clubs that were mentioned in the article have since closed. When I sat down with Matt Kemple, 1/3 of the team that runs the Laughing Tap, I asked him to tell me the story of working with his co-founders to get the Laughing Tap up and running.
We opened in January of 2020. We were open for 6 weeks, and then we immediately closed. We got carpet, and then the next week we were closed. But prior to the Laughing Tap, I had been producing comedy for many years under the name Milwaukee Comedy. It made sense and it was easy to Google. And then beyond that, I founded the Milwaukee Comedy Festival, which I actually didn't know until a couple years ago. It's one of the longest running comedy fest in the country. And I just did it because we all just needed a way to bring attention to the comedy scene in town. But anyway, fast forwarding, we had been producing a lot of shows And then the comedy clubs in town all slowly died out. And then we realized we were doing shows on like Wednesdays and Tuesdays and whatever to avoid conflicting with the club weekends. And then it was like, there's no clubs, there's nobody doing shows on weekends. Maybe we should shift our schedule. And by doing that, we literally like doubled the number of shows we were doing. We were doing like one show a week. All of a sudden we're doing Fridays and Saturdays in different venues. And it got to the point we were doing 10 to 15 shows a month. And at one point we did 20 shows in a month. And that's the point where you're like, yep, maybe we should look at opening a permanent location.
Ooh, actually, that tracked with something that Brett also said.
I would always go with the theory that like to build a scene, it was like a pyramid. Your open mics are the base of it. And then you should have a bunch of open mics and then a slightly smaller amount of like bar showcases. And then maybe like a couple like monthly or quarterly like theater shows like Matt Peterson used to run at the Guild. And then hopefully there'd be like a club at the top of that pyramid.
Anyway, back to Matt.
And I just kind of talked to a couple of people I know. Hey, you own some buildings. Could I just see what's out there? And they were like, I don't have any of those buildings we had talked about, but I have this one and it's going to be available in 3 months. And if you want it, you need to take it right now because people really want it. And I'm like, okay, I have heard people say that before. Real estate's a vicious game. And this wasn't a real estate person. This was just somebody that I had worked with in the arts community. I took a look at it and it was a brewery that I had been to many times that had closed. And then a different brewery came in and was there just for a year to have a tap room. And they're like, hey, these guys are leaving and they don't want another brewery here. Do you want it? And I was like, yes, I do. Can't afford, but let me just talk to my people and just see. I don't know what kind of timeline you're thinking, but we'll see. It was perfect for us. So the tap room side in the front, which I'm sitting in now, it was completely built out. It had the bar. It had a big open space that we could put about 100 chairs in. It had a bunch of tap lines, and we're in Wisconsin, and I don't know about Albuquerque, but beer is real important here. So is cheese. But at the beer side, we thought we could maybe do that. So the name The Laughing Tap went with the idea that we were a beer-centric area, but it's based in laughs. And I mentioned it to my business partners and they're like, okay, that's a crazy idea, but let's at least just look at it. We looked at it. It ticked every single box that we were looking for. The part of town that we were in is street level, it's handicapped accessible, and there's this whole back end that had a brewery that's roughly 3 times the size of the front room. And so we were like, our plan was always to start with something and then be able to grow. So for us to have a facility that we could build something out that was 100 seats and then down the line do something that was like a second room that could have several hundred seats or more. Again, it was just ticking all those boxes. It sort of got to the point where it really felt doable. I really thought we were crazy. We're looking at this and we had a 5-year plan and we're a year and a half into that plan. But honestly, it just worked out. Some of it was a combination of just knowing people and networking with certain people over the years. And then just, people and they're like, you are somebody I trust. So here's the deal. And they were like, nobody knows this is available. Do you want it? And so I met the landlord and it was one of those things where we just figured out on paper, okay, we would need some time to paint and do this and that and make it something that we need to get a liquor license and all these different things that you have to do. And honestly, the thing that really sealed the deal is I really didn't think we were going to do it. I thought it was insane. But on paper, it made sense. And I come from a very theatrical background. I did not come from a business place. But I've had to learn those skills over the years. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to write a business plan, even if it's something that I'm not going to use now, even if it's something maybe I take it out of the drawer 5 years from now and hey, that works. So I wrote it down and I sent it to my dad, who had more of a business finance background. And he said I should do it. And I was like, you're crazy. What? You're supposed to say, don't do it. And he said, honestly, the numbers make sense. And when I met the landlord, he flat out said, I don't want another brewery here. I don't want a restaurant. I want something that is going to bring people to this neighborhood and help this neighborhood, because this neighborhood already has a bunch of awesome restaurants and bars. There's a brewery right up the street. There's a distillery right up the street. We're in a community that is looking for reasons to bring people to town. They park once and there's stuff to do that they can walk to. So it was like, wow, even the landlord like wants to work with us. So I threw a number out that I didn't think that he would say yes to. And he said, yes, I'll give you the space for that a month. And I was like, look, as long as we can sell that many tickets. I had built my entire producing career on using other people's venues. Mm-hmm. So we had never been able to use bar sales as a way of bringing in income. So everything is based off of what I'm paying out comics and what's left over. And so I based my numbers off of that, with the bar kind of being a separate, it's part of the same thing, but we don't consider that when we're considering ticket sales and what it costs to do certain things. And scary enough that on paper made a lot of sense. And again, talking to all these people, I tried to ask as many questions as I could. I tried to figure out, am I crazy? Probably, but I'm at least putting that crazy energy towards something positive. And our viewpoint wasn't, holy crap, we can just make tons of money opening a comedy club. Our goal from the beginning has always been to focus on the comics. And again, not having a bar to dictate a show. It's not about how many nachos we can sell. It's not about how many Long Island iced teas we can sell. It's about, when we sell tickets, is the audience happy? Is the comic happy? The comics on stage happy? Then that makes me happy. So all of these different things went into the decision, and it basically, it is really just that gut feeling of, this is crazy. We are planning to do this years from now, and it's gonna happen. It was one of those things where it was like, it really felt like, maybe this is an Albuquerque reference. I'm in the Midwest, so I don't know, but I felt like lassoing something that's just pulling you. And I'm like, okay, let's just slow down and make sure this is the right choice. But in the end, it felt like the right choice, and we went for it.
And how was it received?
The public's reaction immediately was phenomenal. People were like, oh, we're so happy that somebody opened a club. We're so happy that you're the ones that opened the club. We had been building up this reputation with these independent comedy events in basements and in bars and just wherever, breweries, wherever we could do them. But we had built up enough of a reputation that people knew who we were. And right away sold out all of our shows when we were opened, and it was really something special.
But then, the same thing that happened to you in 2020 happened to the Laughing Tap.
When that happened, like everybody, we were like, I'll just be depressed for just a short little period of time, because that's what they said, and then it'll be okay. We'll figure it out. And it wasn't okay. We opened this place, you think of everything that can go wrong, and then you hope for the best. And nothing really went wrong. You expect there to be these extra expenses. And it was like, hey, that all worked out. With the pandemic, it was the opposite. It was like, hope for the best. Nope, it just keeps getting worse. We buckled down and we decided, okay, we need to go into emergency mode. We have rent coming up that we're not going to be able to pay. What do we do? So in the very beginning, there was a PPP program that went through, and we were able to get that and kept our head above water. But at the same time, I had another venue, my theater venue. We had to close that. So I'm dealing with closing that venue, desperately trying to keep this venue open and trying to figure out if I'm making the right decisions. So we did a donation campaign. We basically pre-sold tickets and said, these are good for whenever we open. And we had a little checkbox on there that if you wanted to, you could just donate the money and not get tickets. We didn't care either way. We were just like, we're desperate, help us pay our rent money. And I want to say, honestly, 80% of the people that gave us money checked that little box and didn't want anything for it. And it literally, this is probably 5 months into the pandemic, and I'm crying because of people's generosity. And then we sold some merch, and we were able to work with a printing company in the city that was a local business that wouldn't make us pay anything until after we had everything printed, and they allowed us to sell some t-shirts and sweatshirts in order to make the money to pay them. Nobody does that. So a lot of it really came down to just putting it out there and saying, hey, we're all in this situation. What can you help us with? And the generosity that I saw throughout the pandemic was really what kind of kept us afloat. And then you get past that point where you're more than 6-8 months into a pandemic, and then people's money run out, people's generosity changes because you have to look out for yourself, and it's just going a lot longer. So there were certainly some moments that were real close. Within a week or two of us having to close everything permanently. And then somehow at the very last minute, we would be able to generate some money, or all of a sudden somebody would buy 10 t-shirts, or we were able to do some satellite shows or very socially distant shows about a year ago, and things started to happen. And it's interesting because I am a very positive person generally. I would say 99% of my life, I'm just don't know how to be sad. Even though horrible things have happened, there's been lots of ups and downs. I've always been a positive person. And we got to that point where it was just really hard to keep that positivity and maintain that positivity. But I thought about where I had come from. And we had been producing shows. I think I'm close to 20 years, way too long. But I started producing shows and 10 people would show up, 15 people, 20 people, even though I was hoping 100 would be there, only 15 would show up. And at the time it was depressing to be like, we're going to fill that whole room. And gee golly, I'm going to produce comedy. And however you feel, that first couple of times. But I realized, you know what? We built it up from that in the beginning, and we can do it again. And that's literally what we had to do. We did shows for 10 people, 15 people. And then we were able to, based on the city's COVID rules, we were able to have 20 people and then 30 people. And now we're at 50 people out of 100. And we are at the point now where we're finally able to keep our head above water. We still have to keep that belt tight, but I'm not worried about having to pay our rent. We're able to at least generate enough income to be able to start paying our rent regularly and all of our other expenses that it takes.
Considering that the long-standing comedy club that we had here in Albuquerque, Laughs, closed in 2009, I haven't more broadly brought up what a complete wrecking ball COVID-19 was to small business, big business, nonprofits, local governments, national governments, the arts, and humanity in general. Obviously, because Laughs closed before COVID was a twinkle in a bat's eye. Listening to Matt tell this story, it was obvious that this was still a hurdle businesses, and especially new businesses, have to jump over. Comedy in particular has some pretty COVID-unfriendly requirements. People sat closely to each other, low ceilings, shared microphones, and even just laughter. Even as things have opened up, the threat of another wave or a completely different airborne event could sweep the leg of a new space trying to make it. Things are working out well for the Laughing Tap, though. Go check out a show next time you're in Milwaukee. It worries me that if a club can't make it in Albuquerque before this stuff is an issue, that it's going to be even harder now that it is. Still, there's a lot of comfort in knowing that we're not the only city missing a home for comedy. The comics in both Memphis and New Orleans keep going out to tell jokes night after night, even without a club right now. And even in major cities with a club or two, there are thriving indie scenes that produce capable and creative talent. Louisville, Kentucky comes to mind. Quick aside, Omaha comedian Zach Peterson is doing a fantastic job diving into these communities and others in his podcast, No Coast Comedy Club. You should check that out wherever you get podcasts. This isn't an ad. I just really like the podcast. You should definitely listen to it. Being a comedian means being part of a network of fellow creatives from sea to shining sea and everywhere in between. Going back to what I said about the music scene here in Albuquerque, remember, Albuquerque is usually the town that bigger acts will occasionally play on their way through to bigger markets. This could be true for comedy too. We could be that middle point between Denver, Phoenix, or various spots in Texas. That can be one way that we contribute to this network. It's another reason why we should have a comedy space of our own. A home for Albuquerque comedy could be a home away from home for comedians on the road. This has been Comedy Ghost Town, produced and hosted by comedian Sarah Kennedy. If you'd like to find out more information about the podcast or me, you can find out more at my website, sarahkennedy.com/comedyghostown.